While Chevy, Ford, and Chrysler all had their important inventions, let's talk about Chevy. Now, with Ford, it's probably the modern assembly line and the flathead V8. And with Chrysler, it's actually probably the Hemi engine or the cylinder head itself. But with Chevy, it really comes down to the small block V8. Really, besides Ford's assembly line innovation, the small block V8 is something we still use today and it is still sold in full size Chevy trucks and SUVs. So today we're going to be talking about Chevy, Ford, and Dodge and the main difference between their V8 engines. You know, we're on the famous Route 66, which is, if you don't know, that runs from Chicago to Santa Monica, California, and we're only 25 miles west of where Route 66 starts. This is one of the most famous roads basically on the planet. General Motors executive once said, what's good for America is good for General Motors, and what's good for General Motors is good for America, and vice versa. And it's been one of the most famous phrases ever used, and nothing. Ford V8s are essentially the most iconic engines of all time. So let's start with a brief history. Now, the Ford Flathead, which came out in 1932, was important for a bunch of reasons, but most importantly, it cast in a single piece, meaning it was made to be affordable. And just like Henry Ford invented the modern assembly line, he was the first one to mass produce an affordable V8 on a large scale. So a common question is, which Ford V8 was the most important to Ford's history? Now, they started out with the flathead V8 engine, which was built from 1932 to 1953, and it was important because it was the first mass-produced V8 engine, and it was also affordable because it was cast in one piece. Then they quickly switched to what's known as the Windsor V8, which first came in the overhead valve pushrod design, which eventually led to the modular single overhead cam. Now, the cammer, which the engine that was banned from NASCAR, that is what I think influenced V8 engines the most for Ford, because as you know, in the 1990s and all the way to 2014, single overhead cam V8 engines became their most popular choice, whether it was the 4.6, the 5.4. Popular topic is, which Ford engine was the most popular after the Ford Flathead? Now, the Ford Flathead was around from 1932 to 1953, but Ford really struggled to find a solid replacement. The Y-block was their first time using a pushrod engine, but because of engine displacement limitations, it was eventually discontinued. And then the Windsor V8 and the Cleveland V8s were small block V8s that were produced concurrently with the other Ford engines, like the MEL big block, which is also referred to as a Lima. That is a big block. And then probably the modular V8s.